From NJ.com, this is Talk is Cheap, a New York Giants podcast. We're talking Big Blue football all year round.
Welcome on in, Giants fans, to episode 135 of the Talk is Cheap podcast right here on NJ.com. I'm Matt Lombardo, as always, and this week, once again, I'm joined by my good friend, the legendary Steve Politi. Steve, how are you, my man?
I'm great, Matt. How you doing?
You know, this is one of those rare weeks, at least it feels rare over the last year or so, where we get to break down and recap a Giants win as they wrap up their Texas two-step with a 27-22 victory over the Texans down there at NRG Stadium.
It had been a while, hadn't it? It feels like it's been like, a couple of years.
Yeah, and really they got everything going. The offense was clicking on all cylinders. It really started to look like the offense the Giants thought they were getting when they hired Pat Shurmur. Saquon Barkley was a threat in all aspects of the offense. The defense took care of business in the second half, and we'll break it all down. But if you like the show, and we really hope you do, we'd love if you would subscribe on iTunes and Apple Podcasts. Leave us those 5-star reviews. Tell us what you like, what you don't like. It really helps us grow the show. And you can also find us on Google Play, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Spreaker, YouTube, SoundCloud, and Stitcher. Just about anywhere you can get a podcast. So if you like what you hear, we'd love if you would subscribe and leave us those reviews. Steve, before we get completely into it, just give me your big picture thoughts and takeaways from Sunday's game.
Yeah, I mean, the big picture was this was what the offense is supposed to look like, or at least closer to what the Giants hoped this was going to look like. That's part one. When you've got Saquon Barkley running the ball well, you've got Odell Beckham catching 100 yards worth of passes, and you've got Eli Manning. Finally, this is for everyone who is lined up to defend Eli Manning and say, he could be fine if you protect him and give him a chance, give him some weapons. Well, here you go. This was the evidence they wanted. 29 passes, 25 completions, efficient in the red zone, throwing the ball into tight windows. I mean, it was hard not to watch that and say, okay, is this the starting point of something we expected to see from this offense?
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And a couple things. You mentioned the red zone efficiency. He was 4 for 4 with a touchdown in the red zone from a passing standpoint. Doesn't get much better than that. Eli finishes with a QB rating of 132.3. You mentioned the 25 of 29 completions, 297 yards, 2 scores, but maybe even more importantly, no interceptions, no turnovers from Eli Manning. So a turnover-free performance, something you can build on. And I think that the two things that really unlocked this offense, and I wrote about it Monday morning on the site, Steve, it was the balance. You look at the 29 passing attempts, 27 rushes, 17 of them go to Barkley, who averaged 4.8 yards per attempt. Wayne Gallman ran the ball 6 times, averaged 4.2 yards per attempt. That tells me two things. Number one, you're starting to get the running game going, but more importantly, and we'll touch on this in a big way as the podcast rolls along here, but the offensive line with Eric Flowers out, and you bring Chad Wheeler in at right tackle. They started to really impose their will on the Texans front seven, which is pretty good, you might have heard, and had a pretty good game. Right. But at least in the ground game, the offensive line kind of had their way with that Texans front.
Right, yeah. And then could you imagine if all the things they tried to change to get this offense to work, that's all they had to do was put in Chad Wheeler and take out Flowers? That's it? I mean, I know Wheeler had some struggles in the second half against J.J. Watt. Obviously, a lot of guys are going to have struggles, but certainly it seemed like from a chemistry standpoint, the offensive line was much better. Another thing I liked is when, Deshaun Watson rallied Houston as you expected. They cut the lead to 5. You're like, all right, what is this offense going to do? It's been in the shell the entire second half. And then, you saw Eli Manning 6 for 6 on a touchdown drive, throwing on third down, a long pass to Saquon Barkley to set up the touchdown. I mean, I think that was another positive sign. Like, okay, they needed a touchdown there to put this game away, and they went down the field and got it. So that was a really good sign as well for this team.
Yep, no doubt about it. And I think what really opened up the playbook for the Giants, and even though they kind of scaled back what they were doing and went with what's worked and what the players liked throughout the week and through the first 3 weeks, is Pat Shurmur got Eli Manning rolling out and throwing on the run. I wrote about it Sunday after the game, talked to Pat Shurmur about it, to Eli Manning about it, a couple of the offensive linemen. And while that sounds like a small adjustment, I think it paid big dividends because it helped Eli to manipulate the pocket a little bit, see the field from a different angle as he was making his throws and kind of got him out of that quote-unquote sitting duck posture with an offensive line that allowed 6 sacks and 2 quarterback hits the week before. So the fact that they got Eli rolling out and throwing on the run, I think that was a huge change for the Giants, and it paid off in a big way.
Yeah, and a good sign for the coaching staff. Remember last year, Ben McAdoo, no matter how much this offense struggled, he was sending out the same 11 personnel, sending out the same formation, just his inability or unwillingness to change things, to shake things up. All right, well, here you are in week 3. The Giants needed the win. The offense wasn't producing the way that Pat Shurmur had expected. He changed something. You almost want to shed a tear if you're a Giants fan. Like, okay, the coach realized it wasn't working, tried something different, and finally they get some results. Now I think the big thing for me is, all right, is this the outlier game, or are we looking at this is the offense that it's going to be this way for a few weeks? Eli Manning did have a couple of good games last year. I think about the Eagles game late in the season that the Giants used over and over again about, well, remember how Eli played against the Eagles? It was
let's also remember about that one game. You have an Eagles team that's road weary from spending 10 straight days between the game in Seattle, practicing for a week in Los Angeles, playing the Rams, and it was also their first game without Carson Wentz, so that there were going to be some growing pains for that Eagles team in that game. And listen, I give Eli Manning a lot of credit for what he did in the first half, and he put up some really big numbers, well over 350 yards passing, but the Giants lost the game.
Right, they did lose the game, yes, but that one effort was sort of held up as this is like the first thing David Gettleman said at his press conference essentially was, well, look what Eli did against the Eagles. I just caution against this, jumping to the conclusion that, okay, all of a sudden they're back, the offense is back, the old man, 37-year-old, here we go. I want to see it against the Saints now. This Saints offense, this Saints defense gave up 37 points to the Falcons. I want to see it for a couple of weeks in a row. Give me a sign that, all right, this is not the aberration, that this is going to be the norm.
No, and I think you're absolutely right. And I think the way that it becomes the norm is copying your game plan from this week, running the ball effectively, trying to give your offensive line the chance to gel and continue to get some continuity. Because, listen, you're not just breaking in Chad Wheeler. This was also John Greco's first start this season at center. So you had 2 new offensive linemen on the road in a pretty hostile and loud environment against a front seven that has J.J. Watt, Jadeveon Clowney, and DJ Reader. And I know that J.J. Watt ended up with 3 sacks. I know the Texans wound up getting 4 sacks of Eli Manning by the end of the game, but I thought this was probably as close to a signature performance that this offensive line has had all year. And I think that moving ahead to week 2, and we're going to get into that later in the week on the podcast, replicating a game plan that features Saquon Barkley heavily and gets Eli Manning throwing on the run is the best way to do that offensive line a favor so they can continue growing, gelling, and getting better.
Yeah, I thought that Saquon really did set the tone, especially in the first quarter when, this is the running back the Giants thought they were getting. He was turning small holes into 15-yard gains. He scored on a beautiful touchdown run, and as opposed to the game against Dallas where the balance was just too far in the other direction toward the pass. I think that was very important, and and against a subpar Saints defense is going to be important again.
Yeah, and you brought up Saquon Barkley, and I think that he's been as advertised or better for what the Giants expected to be getting out of the number 2 pick in the draft. He had 117 all-purpose yards on Sunday afternoon, yards from scrimmage, that is. And for the season, he's now on pace for over 1,882 yards from scrimmage and 10 total touchdowns. And I think that if you told the Giants when they made that selection that that's what you'd be getting in a rookie running back, they'd be pretty excited about that. And so far, he's delivered. It's a long season and a lot can happen. Right. But from what you've seen so far, I think this is exactly what the Giants hoped they were getting.
I saw somewhere he's also on pace to break Anquan Bolden's record for receptions as a rookie. That's something that I don't think the Giants would have expected going in. That's incredible. That obviously they had 16 2 weeks ago against Dallas, and that kind of will bring up the numbers a little bit. And I don't think they're going to throw to him that often, but still, he's doing everything they've asked. He's been, and what I love too, Matt, and this is like a small thing, and maybe the fans might have noticed it, but he scores that touchdown. There's no big celebration. There's no, come look at me. It's
Right.
just toss the ball back to the referee, run back to the sideline. I mean, it's just professionalism that is beyond his years. Every time he gives an interview, he represents the organization well. I mean, there's just a lot to like about him, both on and off the field.
Yep, I've seen him hand the ball to the refs quite a few times during his college career. But you look at the numbers so far, and this is what kind of astounds me. He's averaging 4.7 yards per carry. And you know that I'm as bullish as anybody on Saquon Barkley, but I'm even impressed given the offensive line play and the fact that his first 4 carries of the game against the Jaguars back in the opener, he was averaging less than a yard and a half behind the line of scrimmage before contact. Right. The fact that he's turned that into 4.7 yards per attempt through 3 games and he's averaging 6.5 yards per reception, that's fairly impressive. And to me, if the Giants' offensive line continues to get better, I think the ceiling goes higher and higher, not only for the entire offense, but the production you might get out of Barkley this season.
So here's my concern. Is he going to make it through this year healthy? I mean, he missed a series with a knee injury. He's been dinged up a lot. He's getting a lot of work, amidst the soreness. He's obviously a strong physical kid. I mean, is he going to make it through if this is the current thing? I mean, that is a real concern, I guess, from any running back. But when you've got this level of workload and you're still 21 years old, that's the one thing that gives me pause.
Yeah, and I think that the way the Texans handled it, I mean, there was a lot of talk about the low tackles on Ingram and on Saquon Barkley. Ingram, of course, the sprained MCL, he's week to week, probably going to be a 3 to 5 week injury, I think, based on, the past history of that particular injury. Saquon had the knee injury where you pointed out that he missed a series. If that's going to be the game plan and the formula, I don't know how you guard against that. But if you're a defender, I think that that's kind of how you have to approach tackling Saquon. I don't advocate tackling low on anybody or making dirty hits, but he's just such a strong runner that if you go high, he's going to plow through you or bounce off of you because he's so strong.
Or run around you. We saw that a couple of times. I mean, he's so fast too. So
I think that might be the one concern, that if teams continue to go low and cut him and go helmet to leg, that's where you might get that injury concern for Saquon Barkley moving forward.
Right, absolutely, and that is the one thing. The concern with drafting a running back at number 2. We've talked about a lot of different permutations of that. Is that there is a shelf life, and there's a concern for that.
Yep. And the big news, of course, broke well before the game on Sunday, and that was the benching of Ereck Flowers. We touched on it a little bit in terms of how much better the offensive line played and what a key role that played in the rest of the offense, having a pretty big performance where they churn out, well over 400 yards of total offense. To me, I think this took a lot of guts on Pat Shurmur's part because, as we said, you're breaking in a new center, which is arguably the second most important position on the offensive line behind left tackle, because we talked about it last week. You have to deal with calling out the offensive line signals, the blocking schemes, the opposing defense. And, oh, by the way, you got to get the quarterback center exchange right before the game starts. And you're doing this on the road against DJ Reader, who had 2 sacks the week before in a loud environment. And they pulled the plug on Flowers and they put Chad Wheeler in there. And I know that he struggled and had his hands full with J.J. Watt. Not many people don't, but I thought he played well. And I think that there's probably a chance here that, barring a significant injury, Giants fans aren't going to see Ereck Flowers take the field again the rest of the season or the rest of his time in his career.
I agree that it was the right move, and it was a gutsy move by Shurmur. I still wonder, though, how they went into the season with him. I mean, we've seen we've had 3 years of film of proof that he couldn't get the job done, and obviously they thought maybe switching him from left tackle to right tackle was going to change things. I don't know how that would have improved him as a player. Technically sound, he just never quite had what it takes to play in the NFL, and I wondered how they kind of exposed themselves to leaving him out there. But all right, so they made a mistake and they corrected it before the season got too far away. So you got to give him credit for that.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And I think that if this is going to be the pattern and this is going to be the offensive line moving ahead, I think Giants fans can breathe a sigh of relief that John Greco stepped in and played seamlessly for John Halapio, and Wheeler was on the level, and I think at times better than what Ereck Flowers was able to give you through the first 2 games rather, before his benching. And another positive, Wheeler didn't have a flag thrown on him. He went unpenalized through this whole game.
And you saw what happened when you've got problems with that. And Houston was just a disastrous offensive line performance. It just completely it sidetracks your entire offense when you have that. And another positive, we criticized Nate Soldier for his first 2 weeks. He was better too. He played up a little bit closer up to the contract. So overall, you're seeing better things from that unit.
Yep, and we've talked about this ever since February, ever since March, ever since after the NFL draft when they decided not to take an offensive tackle and they took Will Hernandez in the second round with the thought and the intention of starting him right away. These things take time. I don't think there's any position in professional sports, let alone in the NFL, where time and continuity and chemistry is more important than along an offensive line. This was this permutation of the group's first outing. They passed almost every test. They checked almost every box. And the fact that they got better as the game went along, I thought, is encouraging for what you might be able to see, assuming they stay healthy for the rest of the year.
You say chemistry, and this is an interesting point that I've actually wondered about. Eric Flowers has been a surly guy who he was the first one out of the locker room after the game in Houston.
He had no interest in answering questions about his demotion.
I can't blame him, not at all. Some of that's fine, but I do wonder. On an offensive line where you have to have five guys playing together, if there's an issue there that we're not seeing now, that the players obviously aren't going to talk about now, but 2 or 3 years from now, we're going to find out, oh, you know what? He also was a guy that wasn't likable or whatever could be. And I don't want to, I'm just wondering if there's something else at work here, just beyond the fact that he struggled as a player.
What I found really interesting about the way the Texans attacked this line, I think this kind of plays into it a little bit. You think back to the Dallas game, and we sat there in AT&T Stadium, and it seemed like 2 out of 3 offensive plays for the Giants, and almost every passing play, the Cowboys were using exotic blitz packages and stunts that really seemed to play on the fact that the Giants didn't have that chemistry, that they didn't have that cohesion, and the communication might have been off. And they really went after Flowers. They really went after the interior of the line and Will Hernandez. And it got ugly very quickly. I didn't see the Texans do quite so much of that. They just played it straight up. They let J.J. Watt and Jadeveon Clowney do their thing. And to Solder's credit, he really made Clowney a non-factor, especially as a rusher. But I think there might be something to that, the week before with Flowers in there, the game plan is let's confuse these guys. Let's play on their lack of chemistry and attack it. And on Sunday, that's not what the Houston Texans drew up whatsoever.
The possible theory, it's also possible that Houston isn't very good. I'm going to throw that one out there. And you almost need to slap an asterisk on a lot of this conclusions with this, because, it just looked like there were elements of that Texans team that I wonder, receivers wide open, just not taking advantage of the guys they have up front, the offensive line, obviously, of Houston. I will say that, this was by looking at it from the outside, and I haven't seen Houston but this one game, but I would say this is a bad Houston team.
Yeah, I think it's going to be, and I think that Bill O'Brien might be in some trouble down there, depending on how Deshaun Watson turns it around. I know it's only his second season, and O'Brien is the guy who drafted him, but I do wonder what his future is like if they wind up 6-10 with Watson not progressing from what we saw pre-injury. But one other thing before we move to the defensive side of the ball, Steve, I thought that for all of the talk last week about getting the playmakers involved early on, getting Odell Beckham Jr. involved early and often, I don't think it could have gone much better for the Giants offense and for Pat Shurmur and for Eli Manning and for those playmakers. Odell targeted 10 times, caught 9 of those targets, 109 yards, averaged 12.1 yards per catch with a 30-yard gain. And Sterling Shepard, welcome back to the NFL season, seriously. Sterling Shepard. 7 targets, 6 catches, 80 yards, his first touchdown of the year on that critical, pivotal fourth quarter drive. He told me afterwards that it felt like a long time coming and like he might never get back into the end zone after the drought for the first 2 games. But you look at those 2 guys, they're obviously the focal points of the passing game, particularly when Evan Ingram isn't healthy. 17 targets, 15 catches, 189 yards and a touchdown. Eli Manning, Pat Shurmur, they'd probably sign up for that out of their top 2 receivers every week.
Yeah, and it's the fact that Eli threw the ball to 7 different targets, and 6 of them, receptions to 6 different targets, and 5 of them had an average over 12. for an offense that, had been dinking and dunking. I mean, that shows you that, they're getting big chunks in the passing game. I still would like to see that. Are we going to have that 60, 70-yard completion, that huge play this week? We still haven't had that from this passing game.
Do you
wonder,
need it, though?
I wonder
if
it helps.
You need it.
It
certainly helps. It certainly helps. But if you can get Beckham particularly involved on a shallow crosser, which we saw a couple of times, and he turns it into a 15, 20-yard gain, or makes a couple defenders miss and he's off to the races, again, it would help and it would blow the game open and all of those things. But if you can efficiently move the ball in 12, 15-yard chunks and maintain time of possession, maybe from a big picture standpoint, maybe that's a more efficient way of operating.
It's true, yeah, but he's also turned those little 10-yard pass plays into 80 yards in his career. True. So, I mean, look, I've just been waiting for that explosion. He's had now 2 of his 3 games have been 100-yard passing. He's been targeted a lot. The Odell Beckham that you draft in your fantasy leagues, the Odell Beckham that you saw the first 3 years was a big play threat, and I guess we're still waiting to see that huge wow moment.
Yep, no, I agree. Let's move over to the defensive side of the ball because I don't think that they've gotten quite enough credit for that performance on Sunday. Kerry Wynn was an absolute monster. Yeah. Forced the fumble on Deshaun Watson, which kind of turned the game around in the second half when the Giants needed it most. He finishes the game with 5 total tackles. Snacks Harrison, Damon Harrison, 7 total tackles, 3 of them solo. He had a tackle for loss. But I think that what might have been most impressive about the defensive performance, Steve, that was the number 1 rushing offense in the NFL. They held the Texans to 59 yards, and they held Lamar Miller to 10 yards on 10 carries. If I asked you what was more impressive, what they did overall against the run or shutting Miller down 10 yards on 10 carries, which is the more impressive feat in your opinion?
That's a tough. I have to say that just shutting it down overall, because you also remember you have a quarterback in Deshaun Watson who can probably the best running quarterback in the league, or certainly one of the top 3. After the way they struggled with quarterback runs in week 1 and week 2 against Blake Bortles, and that when you see big runs like that, the fact that they were able to limit some of that too also helps. I mean, the defense overall, I think, has been consistently good in 3 weeks, and they're doing it without Olivier Vernon, which when you don't have your best defensive end in there, and you're still able to do this, I think has been really impressive.
And on Sunday without Eli Apple as well. And we talked about how the point of emphasis on offense was get the ball to Beckham early and often, get the playmakers the ball in space. Mm-hmm. Don't just dink and dunk. On defense, the point of emphasis and the conversation point the entire week was how do you fix the zone reads? How do you fix those quarterback runs? You touched on it. Deshaun Watson, 5 scrambles, 36 yards, averaged 7.2 yards per pop. But Steve, his longest run of the day was only 10 yards. And you look at the 42-yard gash that they gave up against Blake Bortles and the Jaguars in week 1. You look at the 15, 20-yard scrambles that Dak Prescott had in week 2. Mission accomplished in terms of the zone read. And this is another case where you did this on the road.
Absolutely, yes. And and remember, we talked a lot about how great the offense was. This was a game where the offense looked like it was going to give it away, and the defense came out in the third, fourth quarter with 2 huge turnovers. One Alec Ogletree interception in the end zone that when it looked like that not only that the Houston was going to score, but was going to take control of this game. I like that aspect of it. I like the opportunistic part of it. I like the fact that they know they're not getting at the quarterback, but they've still been aggressive overall. I mean, I think that Jane Betcher, the new defensive coordinator, is doing a fantastic job.
Well, let's talk about that Ogletree interception, because I know you wrote a column about it Monday morning. But I look at that play, and for all of the flack that Alec Ogletree took in the preseason for being an absolute liability in coverage, for all of his struggles against Saquon Barkley in practice, for the big plays he gave up against the Cleveland Browns and the Detroit Lions, that was kind of a redemption moment for him. He was stride for stride with Lamar Miller. I know Miller got a step behind him in the end zone, and Watson kind of underthrew it, but Ogletree made a hell of a play, and he came down with the interception. If they scored there, it could determine the outcome of the game the other way. But just how big a moment was that play for you, for Ogletree and the rest of the defense?
Oh, I think that was the biggest moment of the game. I mean, for him to come up with that interception, you mentioned it's just on what is, of course, a mismatch and a play that this team is not making last year. Right. I'm not going out on a limb to say that they went out and they got Ogletree. They took a big contract on for a reason, and it was to shore up a linebacking position that had been weak for, it seems several years. And here's a guy who had some struggles with the Rams and needed a fresh start. And, I think you're seeing that he is a good fit here. He's an extremely likable guy. He seemed like he's respected in the locker room. What I loved, I'm standing in the locker room and Carl Banks comes down from the radio booth. And, the respect that Ogletree showed to one of the legends of Giants linebacker lore by just standing there listening to what Carl Banks had to say. Carl's giving him tips on how to defend that play, and Ogletree listened and asked questions. And, I think that goes a long way with this franchise and with the leadership of this, with the alumni of this franchise when you see something like that. But overall, I totally agree. I think that was the biggest play of the game. And, on a day that they did give up a lot of yards and they gave up a lot of passing yards, at least they made the big turnover that they needed to kind of stop that last Texans run there. Yeah,
it was a timely turnover. Kerry Wynn had a turnover as well. This is a defense that's been building and building and building. They only give up 20 points each of the first 2 weeks, 22 points this week against the Texans. And they're in the top 15 in scoring defense, top 20 in overall defense and passing defense. And I think that once you start to get some of your critical personnel like Vernon and like Apple back on the field, there's a chance that it could just start to build. And I know the competition is going to get a lot tougher. You have some big games coming up. You got the Saints at home, and for all of their struggles on the road, you still have Drew Brees and Alvin Kamara. Then you got to go down to Charlotte and take on the Carolina Panthers with Cam Newton, Devin Funchess, and Christian McCaffrey. Then you have the Eagles looming. You have the high-powered Falcons. So they're going to be put to the test, but for at least for a day, and I think through the first 3 weeks of the season, you have to be optimistic about what you've seen from the Giants defense overall.
Right. Now I'm going to give the but, just like I did with Eli. But we haven't seen enough. But that's still the fact that they can't muster a pass rush or haven't done it consistently has to be a big concern when you mention these quarterbacks. You're going to struggle against Drew Brees if you can't get pressure on him. You're going to struggle against Matt Ryan. You're going to have Carson Wentz. You're going to have issues here. And I don't know what the latest on Vernon is. Certainly he is a big component of that. They really need to find a way to get more pressure on the quarterback.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And we've talked very glowingly about this game, and rightfully so. There was a lot to like coming out of this win. Giants' first win of the season. They're 1-2, and in a week-to-week league where you look around and you start looking at the scores and you see Minnesota getting, sandblasted at home by the Buffalo Bills of all
teams. Thank God I'm not a gambler because I would be flat broke.
That was the end of my suicide pool entry for the year. Or see you later, $50. But you look around the league and you look at some of these scores. And you look within the division and you see the Cowboys getting, waxed by a very mediocre Seattle Seahawks team at best. So there's a lot to like and feel good about because on any given week, any given Sunday, any team can beat any other, as we saw. There are also some reasons to kind of worry about this Giants team coming out of this game. Listen, Steve, for as great as the offense was, it was dormant for close to two quarters from the end of the first half until the final 5 minutes of the game. What do you think happened there? Because rewatching the game on the flight home, I didn't get the sense that Pat Shurmur got conservative. I didn't get the sense that things weren't clicking. They just couldn't move the ball, and I think the Texans did a nice job getting into the backfield and being disruptive during that stretch and forcing some 3-and-outs. But that got kind of hairy there after halftime until the fourth quarter.
Yeah, I think easy answer. J.J. Watt happened. He started getting pressure, got to Eli a couple of times when there was just absolutely no shot for Eli. I don't know. Certainly, I don't think they got. How would you know? They didn't have time for a drive to develop with the 3-and-outs. But yeah, that is a concern. Absolutely. And we've talked about this ad nauseum. They haven't scored 30 points since the last game of Tom Coughlin's career. So 2015 still didn't do it, and they had 20 at halftime. So this was, I thought for sure, well, this is the week. Finally, this is going to be 35, 40 points. But no, you saw the offense stall and in the second half. And again, that's just another sign that this is a work in progress for this unit.
Yep, and I think that if you want to go one step further with that, we haven't seen the Giants play a complete four-quarter game through 3 weeks of the season, because you look back at the opener, there were some nice plays, and they moved the ball down in the red zone once in the first half against Jacksonville, came away with a field goal, and then it wasn't until the fourth quarter and Saquon Barkley's 68-yard touchdown that they put points on the board. The offense was a mess, couldn't get out of its own way, couldn't get past the 50-yard line for 3.5 quarters against the Dallas Cowboys until under 2 minutes to play. Evan Ingram scores a garbage time touchdown, but they jump out to the lead, their first lead of the season. They scored their first quarter touchdown of the season against the Texans. But as we said, they kind of fell asleep for those 2.5 quarters from halftime till about midway through the fourth. That's, to me, that's one of the things that I worry about for this team when they face those tougher games and those tougher teams. Or are they going to be able to put together a full 4-quarter effort?
Yeah, and if they fall asleep against the Saints for anything close to that level, you would think they're going to lose by a lot of points. Just looking at the box score from that Saints Falcon game, so my goodness, the amount of Drew Brees is just on fire. So I don't know. Pinpointing exactly what happened, it's hard for me to figure out. Did they get away from the run? I don't know. That it was just as simple as not being able to block J.J. Watt and that Houston pass rush for a while. It's something else to figure out.
And I guess the big thing to take away moving forward is what do you build on from here? Because to me, it's the balanced offense. It's the defense against the run. You need to start adding building blocks on top of that, though, like establishing some sort of pass rush and like putting together a consistent, dominant effort.
Yes, I think you build on. I mean, obviously, you build on the way you created opportunities for Eli Manning to succeed. You build on that, and you put him in positions where he's going to be able to roll out, to avoid the rush, to make up for what is still. I mean, it's still a below average offensive line. I know we've talked a lot about the improvements of it, but it's still going to be. I mean, he's not going to have a clean pocket. Like every play, a lot of Giants fans wish it could be possible. It's not going to happen. So you've got to continue to find ways to make it a success. And I think, you saw that blueprint as you talked about earlier. So let's do it again. Let's do it see them do it again against the Saints, do it again against the Panthers. So then you have more faith than it just wasn't a one-off. That's kind of what I want to see when New Orleans comes to town.
Yeah, I think so too. And the way that you do that is you manipulate the pocket. You get Eli throwing on the run. You get him moving around so that he's not just waiting for the pass rush to get there. You look around the league, there aren't many clean pockets, right? I mean, no. even Carson Wentz in Philly, many of his plays are from scrambling or getting out of trouble in the pocket. You look at Deshaun Watson, we saw it firsthand. He's at his best when he's throwing on the run, when he's moving around. Cam Newton, the same thing.
Watching that game last night, Ben Roethlisberger, the Steelers. I mean, it's like, oh my gosh, I'm constantly under pressure. Yeah,
even just sidestepping the pressure, I think is big, and I'm encouraged by the fact that Eli was finally able to do that. Sometimes as a reaction, but a lot of times by design.
Yep, absolutely. Agree totally.
Yep, and I think that on Sunday, the game plan has to be establish the run early, get the ball in Barkley's hands early, maybe rotate Wayne Gallman in there as a change of pace to keep Barkley fresh, but establish the run and let the offensive line continue to gel and do their thing. We're going to really have a soup-to-nuts preview of the Saints game later on in the week, break down all the key matchups as we did last week. But before we completely close the book on the win over the Texans, Steve, who gets your game ball for the win over Houston? We're going to do this after wins. We didn't do it after losses because I don't think you give out game balls after losses. There are no moral victories here. But if you're giving out a game ball or a helmet sticker, who gets it for the Giants win over Houston?
I'm going to take the page from Eli Manning's book because I really thought it was when they bring out those little corny clips from post game on Twitter. Usually I'm not all that moved. Okay, well everyone has a nice speech after you win a game, but I thought it was cool to see Eli step up after the Giants win and interrupt Pat Shurmur and say, the next one's for coach, and hand him the game ball because I think it meant a lot for Shurmur. It was kind of a funny, cool, he big smile on his face. But I mean, give the coach credit for this one. It's his first win. You saw something about him, the kind of guy he's going to be, but willing to make changes. I love them. This is another thing that fans can't see, but he walked around that locker room even after the media was let in, went up to at least a dozen players as I was watching to personally congratulate him, give him a hug. He hung out afterward to talk to the media about it. Was the last guy on the bus. I don't know. I just felt like that was kind of you don't usually give game balls to coaches, but I'm going to give one to him.
Yeah, well, let me just, expand on that a little bit, because I know that you've covered sports for a long time. You've been in a lot of different locker rooms, whether it's the NFL, Major League Baseball, college locker rooms, all of those things. I've covered the NFL now for 5 or 6 years for various outlets, right? So I've been around NFL locker rooms for a while. I was in the locker room when the Eagles won the Super Bowl last year. And that was the one exception to me when Doug Peterson gave the victory speech and all the coaches hung out with the players. And you'd expect that when you win a Super Bowl title. Steve, I've never seen after a regular season game, whether it was Andy Reid, Chip Kelly, Doug Peterson, any other visiting team that came through Lincoln Financial Field when I was on that beat, and I'd be over there for different assignments. I've never seen a head coach hang out in the locker room. And Pat Shurmur did this on Sunday and walked around to every player, congratulated them, shook their hand, gave them some sort of word of encouragement or appreciation for the effort. I've never seen that out of a coach. And I think that he took on a lot of heat last week for how he handled an interview with Mike Francesa on WFAN, took a lot of heat for not criticizing his players. But I'll tell you this, I think that plays very well to his players, that he's not going to throw his guys under the bus, that he'll shoulder the blame, he'll take the heat. And I don't think he really cares about the outside noise. And that's now one of the tenets that he's trying to establish about this new Giants culture. But it really kind of blew me away. It said something about him that I saw him act that way after that game.
Yeah, absolutely. I thought he took too much heat for that interview. I really don't know what he's supposed to say. He's not going to be, he's got to be week to week. He's got to be even keel. That's how you do this as a coach. I mean, you've got to keep it level. And I thought he's been fine with his dealings with the media so far. And that was a problem in Cleveland from all accounts. Was he was too thin-skinned and he got pricklish at times. But no, in this, I mean, I think he's been okay there. And I agree. I'm trying to think if I've seen something like that. I'm sure I have, but it just stuck out to me, the level of him walking around that locker room, and the happiness and sharing with the players. I mean, if I'm sure coaches have done it before, but again, it was just something that I noticed. And you're right. I think it does have to make an impact with the players.
No, I agree. So the Giants win this one 27-22. We tie a nice bow around week 3. Giants are 1-2, and there's opportunity in the division. There's opportunity in the early playoff race and all of those things, but they have to take care of business, have to build on it next week against the New Orleans Saints, because even falling to 1-3 and staring down the pipe at a road trip to a well-rested Carolina Panther team coming off the bye, not to get too ahead of yourself, it can kind of go back the other way pretty quickly. So you have to keep continuing to win, continuing to put yourself in good positions from play to play and week to week.
It's nice that you said the P word here in the podcast, not podcast, but playoffs. But if they, if they lose to the Saints, we're back in the same situation where we're like, well, this is, we're barreling. You think you're barreling towards 6-10, you're not going to get there, because you're right. I mean, it is a week to week league, but at 1-3. You're going to Carolina, Cam Newton with that schedule looming, it can
with a week of rest. Yeah.
And this can get out of hand pretty quickly. Absolutely.
Yep. So we'll be back later this week to preview that game, break down all the key matchups, tell you everything you need to know about New Orleans. I'm looking forward to that. Steve, this one was a lot of fun. Any other final thoughts on Houston or on the Texans game before we get on out of here?
You know what? I think next trip, I'm disappointed by our lack of a good meal, and I know you had a steak before I got there because I was at the Rutgers game. But we need to eat better on the road, Lombardo, if we're going to do this again in Carolina. All right, this is got to be a priority. I didn't get any barbecue in Houston. It was a complete utter meltdown on my part.
Yeah, we will take care of business in Charlotte. I had a great meal on Saturday night. I don't know what you were doing back there in Piscataway, but
clearly not enjoying a good meal in Piscataway. Put it that way.
So we will make it right, and we'll welcome back Ryan Dunleavy on that trip. We'll do that the right way. We'll take him out. We'll treat the father to a great meal. But before then, we have some business to take care of. This week, we'll have the preview pod later on in the week, looking ahead to New Orleans. This was a lot of fun. You can follow the show on Twitter at Talk is Cheap NYG. I'm at Matt Lombardo NFL. Steve is at Steve Politi. And again, if you like what you heard, we'd really love if you subscribe on iTunes or Apple Podcasts. Leave us a 5-star review. Tell us what you like. And find us on YouTube, SoundCloud, Stitcher, Spreaker, SoundCloud, all those fun podcast places. But we're going to get on out of here. Steve, I'll talk to you later in the week on the preview podcast for Week 4.
Thanks, Matt.